Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition, and as we have been doing over the last couple of weeks, we're going to spend just a little bit of time with our good friend Dr. Doug Groothuis. We're working our way through his book, Philosophy in 7 Sentences, and so we'll get to that in just a minute. But then, just as a program note, let me just mention at the bottom of the hour, we will then, of course, be joined by our roundtable discussion of Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter. I thought we might focus on a few things happening out of the state of Texas that you need to know about, and then, of course, in our national hour, we'll be talking about the fact that indeed Nancy Pelosi says she's going to send the articles of impeachment over to Chuck Schumer, and that will begin that impeachment trial in the Senate. At the same time, of course, when we have so many other things happening in the new Biden administration, we're going to be talking about that in some detail over the next couple of hours. So, again, I encourage you to tune in then. But one of the things we thought would be very helpful is most of us are not inclined to sit down and read a philosophy book. But at the same time, philosophy is so important in the kinds of discussions we have every day about your faith, your family, your freedom, what's happening in the political realm, what's happening in the cultural realm. And we thought that it would be good to maybe just pick out every Friday, about a half an hour, one of the chapters in the book by Doug Groothuis, which is entitled Philosophy in 7 Sentences. Now, if you've been following with us, we talked 2 weeks ago about Protagoras. Last week we talked about Socrates. Today we'll talk about Aristotle. Doug Groothuis, of course, is an individual that has his Ph.D. as well as a bachelor's degree from the University of Oregon, a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He's been on this program so many times over the years, talking about everything from some of the earlier books, Unmasking the New Age and Confronting the New Age. Of course, we've talked with him on a number of occasions about his book, Christian Apologetics, which is being updated, which you might want to get a copy of, Truth, Decay, and, of course, this book, Philosophy in 7 Sentences. Doug Groothuis, always great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Kerby. Happy to be back.
Aristotle, again, for people that maybe join us for the first time, you take a sentence, and this one's out of Aristotle's Metaphysics. All men by nature desire to know. And I think maybe way to get to this is, I would imagine most of our listeners are familiar with a painting, The School of Athens. If you come to the probe offices, I think we even have it hanging in the hallway. And what you have is Plato there with a book, but he's pointing upward. Aristotle is instead pointing downward. And I think in some respects that gives us a little bit of an idea of the difference between Plato and Aristotle. Can you help us with that?
Right, it does. Aristotle was one of the great systematic philosophers like Plato. He wrote on everything that he could study. And he was known to be more down to earth in the sense that he wanted to gain knowledge through empirical observation. And Plato was very much concerned with the eternal realm of the forms, or the immaterial realm, which was higher and better than the material realm. But Aristotle was really not only a philosopher, but a kind of scientist, at least in terms of exploring nature. He didn't come up with any scientific inventions that would have to wait quite a while for the Middle Ages and the scientific revolution in many ways. But the way I set this up is that Aristotle, like all good philosophers, was concerned with knowledge, and he believed it was something natural to humans to desire to know. So this brings up the question of how ought we to know the world and ourselves, and how much can we know as human beings, as he called it, as rational animals.
And one of the things I think you just pointed out in passing, is mentioned in your chapter, is that he really was, in a sense, doing kind of scientific observation. Now, he didn't do the kind of investigation today that we take for granted. I remember even in some of my science classes, they would say, Aristotle said this, but now we know this, because he would see something and make an assumption based upon it, but he didn't do a dissection or an investigation of it. But I think it illustrates again that he wasn't just thinking lofty philosophical thoughts. He was actually exploring everything. And really, up until a few centuries ago, the distinctions between, say, natural science and philosophy were pretty blurred, because you had individuals oftentimes looking at the scientific world at the same time when they were asking questions about philosophy, weren't they?
Right. It used to be called natural science, basically.
Right.
So even up until the time of Blaise Pascal, who we'll talk about later, there wasn't a hard break between, if you will, the armchair philosopher and the scientist who is empirically studying the nature of the world. They were after knowledge. They were after beliefs that were rationally credentialed.
One of the things that I think we can certainly recognize of the impact of Aristotle is the issue of logic and what we call the law of non-contradiction. And that is important because today, as you well know, there are especially young people who say, I don't have any problem with contradictory ideas being true at the same time. But at the real basis level of life is this idea of the law of non-contradiction. You even talk about how sometimes people abandon the idea of the law of non-contradiction when they talk about religion. But we might, for just a minute, explain what that is and why that's so crucial in terms of developing what we might call critical thinking.
Right. The law of non-contradiction means that contradictory truth claims cannot both be true. So Aristotle lays this out in several places in his book, Metaphysics, and this is what I really zero in on in the chapter as his contribution that we should think about. So to put it kind of informally, something cannot be what it is and not what it is in the same way at the same time in the same respect. So I can't be 64 years old today, as I actually am, and 68 years old today. That's just impossible. You don't have to do any kind of a survey on it or an opinion poll. It's true that I'm 64, and it's not true that I'm 68. Now, it's pretty commonsensical, and in fact, people trade on this all the time, especially when they accuse their political adversaries of being inconsistent and hypocritical. People think, well, you said this, and then you did the opposite. So you must not really believe what you said, or you believe it and you don't care about breaking your own rules. So even though you can get technical about what the law of non-contradiction is, it's really a basic intuition for all critical thinking. And when people think that they have put it aside somehow, or they have transcended it through a mystical experience, or they say it's just a socially constructed idea, or maybe it's a Western white male construct, they're saying, well, okay, I don't accept it. I deny it. I don't think it's true. Well, then you're assuming it, because you're saying the law of non-contradiction is false, meaning it's not true, meaning you're having to assume it to deny it. And that's not a very good position to be in. It's sort of like telling somebody in English, I don't know how to speak English.
Yes. And it's a good example. We're going to take a break, but we'll come back and talk about a little bit more of that, and then maybe do a comparison between this idea of law on contradiction and, say, Zen Buddhism and some of the other ideas, because it's crucial to thinking biblically and logically. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last week, I talked about how divided we are as a nation. That is the conclusion of David French in his book, Divided We Fall. I have been struck by the number of commentators who have been making the same point. In one of his opening monologues, Tucker Carlson admitted that you may have nothing in common with people on the other side of the country, but you're stuck with them. He dismissed the idea that groups of Americans will break off into separate, peaceful nations of like-minded citizens. After all, there's no such thing as a peaceful separation. Scott Moorfield starts his column by noting that there are some things we can all agree on. Murder and rape are bad. Love and kindness are good. But then he quickly moves to all the things left and right can't seem to agree on. Things like liberty, taxation, varying degrees of wokeness, critical race theory, free speech, abortion, self-defense, immigration, and the Second Amendment. Is there a solution to all this? Is this country headed to a two-state solution? Some use that phrase to describe what might be possible in Israel with the Palestinians. Most of us know it will never work there. It really isn't possible here either. As I've discussed on radio, even if you thought this would work, how would you divide America? We don't exactly have a Mason-Dixon line. The blue states are generally on the coast, with red states in the center of the country. Even red states have blue cities, and blue states often have vast red sections. Although we are a divided nation, we are tied to one another. Tucker Carlson says we are inseparably intertwined and like conjoined twins. Let's face it, separation isn't an option, even if we are a divided nation. These wise commentators are reminding us that we need each other. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Dr. Doug Groothuis, Philosophy in 7 Sentences, talking about Aristotle. I might just mention one of the endorsements comes from Tom Morris, and I remember crossing paths with him when I was at Yale University. Wrote the book, If Aristotle Ran General Motors, and talks about this book and gives a great introduction to it, and, of course, a delightful book in itself. But this one really takes us into this whole issue of logic. You've got a great quote here, Walt Whitman, in the poem Song of Myself. Do I contradict myself? Well, then, yes, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. And there are people that just sort of want to live with that contradiction, but they can't really function effectively in society unless they actually embrace it, because even rejecting the law of non-contradiction requires you to use the law of non-contradiction. True?
Right. It's what philosophers call a necessary precondition for knowledge, for communication, for thought. And it's the way the world is. It's not simply an idea that Aristotle made up. He codified it. He did not invent it out of whole cloth. And you really cannot hold yourself intellectually accountable or anyone else intellectually accountable unless you, at least tacitly, implicitly, accept this principle. And we use this, or we should use this all the time, for example, in interpreting the Bible. We want to understand what the original author meant, and then we want to, let's say, figure out how to relate Paul's teaching on grace with James' teaching on good works. And the answer is not, well, Paul says we're saved by grace alone, and James says you have to add works to it, and that's a contradiction, and we'll just live with that and call it spiritual. No, you have to do some good exegesis, some interpretation of the different passages, and some good theologizing, and the quick answer is that James is talking about how we demonstrate our faith. He's not saying that works save us, but works confirm that we are, in fact, redeemed. So good biblical interpretation, theology, everything, politics, science has to abide by the law of non-contradiction. It's certainly not anything that is particularly from one race or one class or one gender. We're all equal before the law of non-contradiction.
And I might, if I can now, maybe go into the other part of your chapter there, because what you do is take us into the idea of Eastern philosophy, Zen Buddhism. Although I would also say that your wonderful book, Truth Decay, dealing with postmodernism, you have this idea that, well, this idea of law of non-contradiction, and really even the whole idea of logic, of linear thought and all of that, which is more of a Western idea, can be completely rejected, but especially with the Eastern idea. And you take us through some of the basic ideas of Zen Buddhism, which show up in other ways, including some of the books that you've written on the New Age. So help us with that, because it does seem to me that unless you embrace just some basic laws of logic, then any kind of rejection of that leads to just the most bizarre kinds of conclusions that don't necessarily fit with reality. Help us out if you can.
Well, they don't. Zen Buddhism, in a nutshell, teaches that the basic mental categories that we use every day actually obscure reality, which they call suchness. And that reality cannot be described. So to be enlightened, to be in touch with the ultimate reality, you have to completely erode the normal categories of thinking, of this and that, either or. You have to somehow get beyond logic. However, the Zen Buddhists have methods by which you can supposedly transcend logic, and one of them is called satsen, and that involves sitting in front of a blank wall, staring at it for hours at a time and not falling asleep. And a Zen teacher would be handy, and if you start to doze off, he will tap you or smack you with a stick, okay? Now, think about that. What they're saying is, if you want to be enlightened, then you should pursue this method. They certainly wouldn't say, if you want to be enlightened, then pursue the study of modal logic, because that's very abstract and, of course, trades on non-contradiction and possibility, necessity, and all the rest of it. So they'd say it's false that you can find enlightenment through modal logic. You have to find enlightenment by sitting in front of a blank wall and staring at it and losing your normal critical faculties. And another thing that will help you is what's called a cone. The most famous one is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And the idea is, well, there is no sound. So you keep meditating on that such that you bypass your normal critical faculties entirely. But there again, they're saying, if you want to be enlightened, either practice satsen or meditate on a Zen cone. So they're still using the law of non-contradiction, while they say the ultimate state of reality is beyond the law of non-contradiction. Now, sadly, some Christians can get very sloppy about logic, and they might say that, well, you're talking about merely human logic, God has his own ways. And that really makes a fundamental, it commits a fundamental error, and that is that, yes, God's ways are above our ways, and his counsels are beyond finding out, as Paul says, but he has revealed a lot of truth to us in Scripture. And we try to navigate our lives by that truth. And Scripture tells us it is impossible for God to lie. So God is not going to say one thing and then say the opposite thing and somehow expect us to believe both of them at the same time. Moreover, the second person of the Trinity is referred to as the Logos in John 1, and that's translated Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, the Word was God. But it also has a range of meanings, and it can mean logic. or intelligible communication. And so you even think of the word like any word that has logic in it is really based on this Greek word logos.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not spiritual to say that we don't have to be logically consistent in our approach to Scripture or in our prayer life or in our spiritual walk with the Lord. Obviously, there's so much more to knowing God than being logical, but if we're going to receive any knowledge from God, we have to be able to sort things out logically, and we have to be able to say who God is and who God isn't, and who He wants us to be, the kind of person we should be in Christ, through the Holy Spirit, and the kind of things that we should avoid. So really, being logical is part of the spiritual life. It's not claiming to impose our logic on God, but rather to discern the things that He has revealed and try to be careful thinkers in the world that He has made, in the world that He wants us to be salt and light in.
I might just mention, as people read through this chapter, of course, you quote from C.S. Lewis, but especially G.K. Chesterton, and in Orthodoxy, he even responds to this idea that all the religions are basically the same, and a very good quote that is useful for individuals. And you run into this all the time. You and I have run into it when we used to speak on college campuses. Still do that occasionally, not as much as I used to, but all religions are basically the same, and I always look at them and say, they only differ on things like heaven, hell, God, salvation, and a variety of other small issues, but that is, right, I think, just a good example of just trying to get rid of the law of non-contradiction, trying to get rid of the idea of logic in religion. But just before we run out of time, I want to point people to your website, as we have done every Friday, DougGroothuis.com. You don't even have to know how to spell his last name, because we have it at our website, pointofview.net. Last week, we kind of featured one that you had, a reading guide on political and cultural discernment, your most recent one on the presidential prayer, Amen and A Women. So it's a good piece there as well. And most importantly, one of these days we're going to come out of this whole lockdown, and I think some of you might want to invite Dr. Doug Groothuis to come and speak to your church, or maybe to the college group or something like that, and I wanted you to be aware of that. We also have, Doug, your book, which is available still. It's in paperback and Kindle, and if people want to follow along, we've been making our way through these philosophers, and it has been very enlightening. We've looked at Protagoras, Socrates, Aristotle. Next Friday, Augustine, and I'm looking forward to that one, as I am every week when we get together with you. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. I think we'll talk a little bit about a couple of these issues in the state of Texas right now. There's some important ones that you need to know about, and then we'll get into the bigger issues, the Biden administration, an impeachment trial, who would have thought, and all sorts of other issues that you need to know about. So you can find the articles we're going to be referring to on our website at pointofview.net, including a link to the good work of Doug Groothuis and the link to his website, as well as the book Philosophy in 7 Sentences. We'll be back right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees, and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, as well as Kelly Shackelford in studio with us today. First of all, Penna, thank you for sitting in here on Tuesday. Yesterday, we even had Dr. Merrill Matthews in here. I was speaking to the Dallas Eagle Forum and saw all of Penna's friends there, and that was kind of fun, too. So I've had a lighter week, but there's certainly a lot to talk about here today. So Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter, let me, if I can, maybe talk about Texas for a few minutes before we get to the national hour. And one of the things, Kelly, we talked about last week, because you started this a couple of years ago, was the Texas legislature is seriously considering whether or not to ban the use of taxpayer funds to lobby for bigger government. And over the last few days, you had some of the people at the Texas Minute reminding us how much money these lobbyists make. This one individual here makes $6,369,000 for representing some of the cities like Amarillo and Lubbock and Waco. Here's another one makes $6,384,000 representing a number of things like Amarillo, Lubbock, Pecos, Reeves County, but also the Texas Beverage Association. And it just doesn't seem to me, maybe I'll come to Penna first because I know what Kelly's going to say, a little bit unfair that when then people go to the state capitol in Austin, and we're paying for it with our tax dollars, then they're actually, in some cases, lobbying to increase our taxes.
Right, and sometimes they're lobbying against us on the issue. So we're paying for the lobbyists that are lobbying against us. And, I think it's time for... I'm kind of surprised that this has not been reformed before.
Yes.
Because we've been reform-minded. We've been paying attention to these things. But it's good to see that there are many legislators now that are bringing this up and paying attention to it, and it could be hopefully on the calendar this time.
Penna makes a good point, which is why has this been stopped? I mean,
I think you brought this up a decade or two ago,
if
right?
If you did a poll of the people of Texas as to whether they think their tax money should be used to hire lobbyists to lobby for higher taxes and all these other things, it would be like 95%. No, they shouldn't be able to do that. Okay, so it's a great question because why is it not happening? It's not happening because the lobbyists are not allowing it to happen. Mm-hmm. This shows you how much power they have. And so it's one of those situations where the reason this is really being discussed is because the Texas Republican Party, they had the largest political convention in the world, and the 10,000 people that came together said, here are our priorities for the next legislative session that we want all the legislators to work on. And they chose this one as one of the top ones they wanted. Now, you got some weird stuff going on at the Texas Republican Party because you've got Alan West, who is very much strong. And I think there were 8 that they came up with, 8 priorities, 8 legislative priorities that the people said these are our priorities. The vice chair of the party, which evidently does not come from the same conservative strain as Alan West, came out and said, well, I don't think that's what's really important, the 8 that they picked. Even if they just got one of those, but they did some other things that were important, we shouldn't be just looking at the 8. And it's like, well, that's what your party just said they wanted to look at. So there's weird stuff going on with people already trying to provide excuses for why the Republicans, who are in control of the legislature, don't do what the grassroots all said they wanted them to do when they elected them and put them into office.
You know, this last half hour here, we're talking about logic, and I guess I'd like to go back to the Vice Chair Parks and say, can you define the term priority? What does the word priority mean to you? Because obviously that is the case. And this not-so-veiled criticism of Lieutenant Colonel Alan West as part of that surface in terms of some of the priorities. But, Penna, another priority, which you and I have talked about before, but it's worth mentioning again, redistricting. Mm-hmm. 3 new congressional districts, and that's going to change everything in terms of probably in this area where we're broadcasting right now and others, because you'll have to redraw some of the congressional districts, but at the same time, state legislative districts and city councils and all sorts of things. And so that's a very high priority in this legislative session, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So you redraw districts. We stand to gain 2 to 3 congressional seats in the state of Texas. And, this is one of the reasons why the election was so hard fought. And the left was trying to get hold of the legislatures, or at least make gains in conservative states. And they didn't get anywhere in Texas. So that's good news. But, I don't know the ins and outs of what the battles are going to be here in Texas as far as how to shape these districts. But it's always a battle. It's always a huge battle, and very controversial even among the same party.
Yeah, everybody's focused along the whole country on election integrity reform.
Yes.
Because if you look at what happened in these elections, really you could blame a lot of the horrible things we've seen in the past few months on the fact that all the rules were thrown out.
Yes.
There was just chaos that people were going, I don't trust what happened. And think back to when we had this issue in Florida and how bad it was. And everybody was like, what is wrong with Broward County? They looked completely incompetent at what they were doing. And it took days to get results and all this. It's fascinating how when DeSantis came in, he insisted upon election integrity reform. They put all these things in place, including you better have your results in before 9:30, or unless you have a judge that's given a ruling, then you're done. And guess what?
They did.
Florida had everything in.
Yeah.
There were no issues. Everything was clear. Everybody knew what the vote count was. So it shows it can be done. All these state legislatures are now meeting, and it is now up to them to do that. And assuming they do that, then guess what's going to happen 2 years from now? Most likely, because of the redistricting you were just talking about, there's going to be a huge, because they're all drawing the congressional lines, there's going to be a huge shift towards the Republican side in the House. Nancy Pelosi has one of the thinnest majorities ever, and the opposing party almost always of the president picks up a lot of seats in that midterm election. But then you add to that the redistricting, and assuming that there's not funny business in elections or problems with elections, we're going to see a pretty huge shift in the U.S. House, most likely 2 years from now.
So on integrity of elections, I imagine this is one of the priorities in Texas, and hopefully, it's just a popular issue. Obviously, it was so.
Yes.
It was just so awful. I don't think I've reported to you on what I did before the Georgia Senate race, but I made calls into Georgia for the Senate to get people, conservatives, Republicans, out to vote. And the people that didn't live in Georgia that were on the list, the numbers of people, I was so frustrated. I thought, cannot a state, especially a state where you have somebody, Stacey Abrams, who claims to want to do everything, right as far as elections. It was unbelievable. Wasted so much time calling people that didn't even live in Georgia and couldn't vote there, and said things like, I haven't lived in Georgia for 12 years. So states have their work cut out for them. They let it go. A lot of it's done by volunteers, and that's part of the reason. But I think now, ladies and gentlemen across the nation, volunteer to help your party to clean up their rolls, because it will make a big difference in 2 years.
What's amazing is they go into court and oppose these attempts to clean up the voter rolls.
The Brennan Center and groups like that. Yes.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous. People move, and there's a number of residents in Georgia was one of the ones that was more. The litigation, nobody ever looked at the merits, but the attorneys who did the work did a lot of work and showed that there were a lot of people voting illegally because they were voting from a residence of a business, which is almost always fraudulent. And it's against the law. You can't do that in Georgia, and you can't do that in most states. And yet they're on the rolls, and you can report it, and they're still on the rolls. And so this is a problem. You've got to clean up the voting rolls. That's and ultimately this is about your vote counting and not having your vote watered down by things that aren't legitimate votes. And so that's kind of a basic step one. But even things like ballot harvesting, where people go around and collect ballots and that leads to a lot of problems. And we just have a criminal prosecution by the Attorney General of Texas on that from some pretty serious violations of that of by using that. But you've got to put those things in the law that say that that's not allowed, or there are people that try to push those type of things and make up the law. We saw that certainly in Texas. Houston tried to decide that they were just going to send out ballots to we can't do that. It's against the law. But they're trying to lock all these things in. If you look at the bills that are filed already in Texas, they're trying to lock all those things in to make it very clear so that people can't try to go into court and say, oh, we've got this new idea and we want to add this. No. The law already addresses this. The legislature has addressed this.
Need to do that in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and some other places as well. We come back, we'll talk about a couple of national issues that impact Texas and have led to some Texas people speaking out. We'll be right back.
Whenever there's a new session of Congress, the House of Representatives adopts a new set of rules to govern the way it conducts business. For the 117th Congress, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Rules Committee Chairman James McGovern have proposed a rules package they claim makes the House of Representatives the most inclusive in history. There's a section that eliminates all gendered terms. If the rules package is adopted by the full House, only gender-inclusive language will be allowed in House rules. So, where the terms father and mother now appear in the House Code of Official Conduct, they would be replaced with parent. Husband and wife would be spouse. Son and daughter would be child. And brother and sister would be sibling. Then it really gets awkward. Aunt and uncle must be replaced with parent's sibling, and cousin must be sibling's child. And for the in-laws, the new terms are parent-in-law, child-in-law, and sibling-in-law. Grandson and granddaughter would be out. Grandchild would be used instead. Stepmother, stepfather, stepson, stepdaughter, stepbrother, and stepsister are out. Step-parent, stepchild, and step-sibling are in, and so on. In Rule 10 of the House, the word seaman appears. It would have to be replaced with seafarer. Chairman would be replaced with chair. These language requirements are for House rules, not floor speeches or bills. But this hat tip to the far left's desire to eliminate every distinction between the sexes is silly and just makes it harder to communicate clearly. Believe me, there will be more of this pronoun and other gender-neutral policy nonsense. The proposed new rules establish a permanent Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Expect affirmative action and quota requirements for the hiring of House staff. In its Blueprint for Positive Change, the Human Rights Campaign laid out a list of 85 recommendations to the administration to elevate and enact LGBTQ policy demands. It appears that leaders in Congress are already acting on it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and then next hour we're going to spend some time. Of course, we are talking about the 48th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. We'll be talking about whether or not there'll be an impeachment trial. Yes, there will be, and a variety of other topics. But I thought for just a minute we would talk about two issues that have national importance, but also are connected back to the state of Texas. And one has to do with all of the National Guard troops, in which Politico reported the other day that these National Guard troops were forced to be actually located in a parking garage without internet reception, with just one electrical outlet and one bathroom with 2 stalls for 5,000 troops at a time when the nightfall temperatures were in the 40s. And I've lived in Washington, D.C., and I can tell you sometimes they get down to the zeros. And you think about having to lay on concrete floors and oil slicks and all sorts of, and dust and dirt and everything. So finally, some of the Republicans came out on Twitter. Remember that Twitter before? Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Schumer, can you explain why are American troops who were tasked with keeping security at the Capitol being forced to sleep in a parking garage? They deserve to be treated with respect, and we deserve answers. Penna, tell us what you think.
Why are they still there? Number one, they're still there because, well, there are a couple of different theories about it. Number one, the left is scared. They actually are afraid that a power is going to be attacked. The other one is no, they just want to show a force in Washington D.C. We've got thousands and thousands of National Guard here. They should have gone home. And well, I think you're going to say that a couple of states that we love, one we're sitting in, actually called theirs home already.
Yeah.
Others need to get theirs home.
Yes, governors in Florida and Texas that I found have said, bring them home. This is ridiculous. Yeah. But just getting that many people home, it's not easy to do. Kelly?
No, and I did like that Trump offered his hotel for them to stay in as well, yes. as a nice contrast. But yeah, that's inexcusable. There's no reason for them to be there at this point, and certainly if they're going to treat them in that way, bring them home. I mean, I think most people looked at it and saw 26,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really an overreaction unless there's some intel we don't know about that would be highly unusual. But that was about the inauguration. If you'll remember, 4 years ago, the inauguration, they were setting cars on fire. Yet that was okay. We didn't have 26,000 troops. Somehow that wasn't a problem. But this year, you get 26,000 troops, and everything's fine, and they're still not sending them home. So I think it's good on a number of levels that both the governor of Texas and the governor of Florida are saying we're bringing our people back.
I think that's going to be true of many things that happen during this administration or things that have happened under COVID, that they cannot be allowed to become permanent. One of them was, I noticed that today in the paper that the flu is way down and that, it's way down. And they're saying it's probably because of all the things people are doing against COVID. So watch out. There'll be attempts to make a lot of those things permanent so that we don't get the flu in coming years.
Well, again, maybe eventually we're just going to say we've been able to cure that with the Biden vaccine, I guess is what we'll be hearing. Here we go. Anyway,
yeah, incredible.
I just had to do that. Here's another one from the state of Texas, and it relates to, of course, one of those executive orders, and that is the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, said he will sue the Biden administration over the freeze on deportation. His quote is, border states like Texas pay a particularly high price when the federal government fails to faithfully execute our country's immigration laws. Now, let's be clear. When we talk about actually having a moratorium or a freeze, whatever word you want to use, on deportation, that doesn't mean deporting people that might actually have college degrees and are the outstanding citizens of America. It also means that it is deporting individuals that have criminal records.
Yes.
And I just do not know, maybe somebody can explain this to me, how deciding not to deport very dangerous criminals is going to make America safer.
Well, it's nuts. I mean, if you can do an executive order saying this is what I'm commanding, you can certainly do one that's a little more refined. If you want to say we're not going to deport anybody who hasn't committed a criminal act, that would at least be, that's not hard to do. But the idea that people who engage in, crimes you're not allowed to send them back and get them out of the country, it's completely ridiculous. Again, it's one of those 95% issues for the American people if you ask them the question. So there are a number of things that have happened that just don't make any sense. But what this highlights, as I think you're pointing out, is the battle is now going to be, when Biden and the administration begin to do things, you're going to have a lot of states they're gonna be the ones that are going to be the pushback. They're going to say, this is not constitutional, this is not right, we're not going to accept this because it affects us when you violate the law. And look, the president has a lot of power, but they don't have a power to disagree with the law. This is the whole thing, that in this country, even the president is under the law. And so this has been a problem under a number of presidents recently, where it started with Barack Obama, who over and over again on immigration said, look, I'm not the king. I just can't say. He said that over and over again, that he could, and then he finally just did it.
DECA and DAPA.
Yeah. And so this, the courts really need to bring this under control, because, it's very important that everybody follow the laws. And certainly the president can direct the executive branch, but that doesn't include disagreeing with laws that are passed.
Yeah. And so, you see this suit. I mean, Obama was sued a lot by Ken Paxton and other attorneys general, and it's probably going to start to happen again. I think it's the issue of immigration is so important to the state of Texas, and so that they have standing, in a sense, to go and do that. Because it not only does it hurt the state with criminals being kept in here, but just economically, all this flow of immigrants, or the fact that now we might have to give a path to citizenship to 11 million. That's probably a bare minimum of people that are already here. And so, on the first day, he decreed a lot of things that hurt these border states, and so they're pushing back.
Well, again, when you say we're going to just stop the Keystone XL pipeline, that's 11,000 jobs, many people guess. Mm-hmm. When you say we're not going to deport even criminals, how does this help the economy? How does this help safety? These are really important issues. And around the table, they love sometimes to have me make a prediction so they can go back and see whether I'm right. But I'm going to make a prediction that Ken Paxton won't have any difficulty at all finding at least one federal judge that will want to issue an injuction on that. Don't you think that's a possibility?
Yeah. There'll be plenty coming. I mean, I know at First Liberty, we're already lining up numerous lawsuits for violations of religious freedom that have already been put in place through these executive orders. So, I'm sure the Attorney General will have no problem finding, and it might be a race between states. Which of these states and their Attorney Generals are going to bring these lawsuits first?
It really points up the trouble with ruling by executive order.
Yes. Because
it's just become more and more commonplace. And, we watch on the very first day so much that President Trump did just reversed.
Yes. Well, again, we've never been real fans of executive orders, whether they came from Barack Obama, Donald Trump, or now Joe Biden. That's not the way to actually implement laws in America. We understand that. And so we'll be consistent. But when we come back, we have the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. We have the possibility of an impeachment trial. We have all sorts of things that the Biden administration's changed already. Coach Kennedy as well, some of the oral arguments. So we just have lots to talk about. We'll see if we can fit all of that in 2 hours. And if you find yourself saying, I want to read some of this, it's on our website, pointofview.net. We also, of course, have a link to First Liberty and encourage you to support them as well. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio, and of course we have so much to cover. First of all, we will probably get to this a little bit later, but this is the 45th anniversary of that decision known as Roe versus Wade, and in this time 60 million babies have died as a result of that, so we will be talking about that a little bit later. We will probably spend some time right now at least talking about the impeachment trial, because Nancy Pelosi says that she will send to Chuck Schumer the impeachment article to the Senate, and thus I think that begins the trial. And there are a lot of questions about what that might mean. We'll get to that in just a minute. Later on, we'll also talk about some of the impact already of these 17 executive orders that were signed by President Biden earlier. And so we'll get into those, including one of the articles on maybe returning back to the Obama-era slush fund payouts to left-wing groups, something which I certainly think we should address as well. And as we go through some of these articles, you'll find all sorts of other topics that you may want to read about, and certainly we'll do our best to talk about some of those. But Penna Dexter, if nothing else, when the article, not articles, but article of impeachment arrives in the Senate, then the Senate has to have an impeachment trial. But what does that mean in the future?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions about that. It's supposed to be sent over on Monday. And as you just said, that supposedly means that the trial has to start. And, you know, we haven't even had our arms around that yet, because there have been so many questions about it, especially with Joe Biden's unity message during his inaugural speech. I just assumed that, you know, it was going to be sort of a battle between the progressive wing and the ones that want to satisfy the Trump haters to get the impeachment going. But then the people that the other part of the progressive wing wants to get some things done. And so there's going to be a battle within, I think, the left about that. But it's been sent over. So now I think the deal is done. They're going to have to spend some time and energy. And certainly the focus of the media will be on the impeachment. And so guess what? Donald Trump will get media attention again.
Yeah, I think this is a huge mistake for the Democrats in a lot of ways. I mean, this is kind of this is about the worst thing you can do. It's going to distract from anything he wants to get done. It's going to inflame, half the country, if not more. I look at this, and I said this during the when he was president-elect, but it's kind of a gift that Biden was given. That he talks about unity, and that was the main thing in his inaugural address. And I saw a lot of people who were on the Trump side say, I really like that. I hope, but everybody said on all sides, it'll depend upon his actions. The easiest thing he could do, he would get so much goodwill. I bet and if you looked at his polls are not good starting off. Okay, if you could. His polls would increase dramatically. He would start out with a lot of wind behind him. All he would have to do is come out and say, we've had enough of this division in the country. We need to come together as Americans. It's not time to impeach someone who is already out of office. Let's move on and focus on the American people. I mean, it would be so easy, but he's not doing that. Not only is he not doing it, if you listen closely to what his press secretary said, she rejected it. She said that, she was asked the question. She sort of avoided it. But she said, we're going to let the Senate determine the times and manners of. So that's not no, this is a bad idea. That is, I'm going along with this. I'm not going to say it shouldn't be done. I think it's a huge blown opportunity for President Biden. And unfortunately, it shows that when he talked about unity, somebody else wrote the words. It's not what he's doing. It's not what he really believes. It's kind of what we got used to before Trump. Politicians who said things that were not truthful over and over again. Now with Trump, he had his issues, but usually what he said was kind of what he thought and what he was going to do. And so people either hated it or liked it or didn't like his style. But now we're back to what we were used to before Trump with politicians saying things that are dishonest. And it's a shame because this would have been easy. I just think if you're Machiavelli, if you're not even about right and wrong and you just want to politically increase your own power, the smart thing to do would have been for him to be a statesman and to stand up and say, this is not what our country needs. And I think he's really missed out on an opportunity for himself politically.
He probably wouldn't be president if we hadn't had COVID. And he said that was what he was going to do. He had a lot of things he was going to do on day one. And he actually did sign a lot of executive orders reversing Trump policies on day one. Many of them were very far to the left. They could please his base. But it is going to be now the big distraction will be impeachment. But, just the idea of working on COVID would have been a popular idea and it would have been popular with Republicans, Democrats across the board. Everybody wants to see progress made. Everyone wants to see the vaccines increased. And, it's very interesting, but someone has been pointing out today that he's promised 1 million vaccines a day over the first 100 days, 100 million vaccines. Trump was doing 900,000 a day. So it's not a real big stretch to increase. In fact, it's sort of automatically increasing anyway as this ramps up. So, he really many missed opportunities. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of surprising.
And the whole process, by the way, I mean, we can get into this when we have more time. But I mean, number one, impeachments in the House are supposed to provide due process. There was no due process given.
None. Yeah.
Okay. And you need to think about this, because if they'll do this to the president at the time, you think you're going to have your due process if you get accused of something? It's very dangerous. We provide due process in this country. It takes time. You have hearings. There's representation for the president. That was all just blown right by in the House. Secondly, the way it's supposed to work is when it's sent over from the House to the Senate, they're supposed to start immediately, and no other business is supposed to occur. And they're already now talking about doing two things at once and all this other thing. And then the other thing, which, again, we'll probably need to unpack later, is it's unconstitutional. Okay? Impeachment is of the president or vice president or, quote, civil officers, somebody in office. Okay? And then secondly, it's about removal. Well, he's gone. Okay? It says the Chief Justice is going to be there. It's required if it's the president. Well, I wonder if they asked Roberts if he's going to show up, because it's not a constitutional proceeding. I mean, there are so many issues here that we just begin to talk about, and it's all unnecessary in the first place because Trump's gone.
Well, again, we'll come back and you can get you out your Constitution. I got it right here in front of me here. Article 1, that'd be Section 3. Again, when the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. But if the president is not there, does that mean, first of all, the Chief Justice will rule whether it's constitutional? That was one question around the table somebody were asking. The other is, if he's no longer the president, does the Chief Justice have to show up? If he does that mean we can confirm any of these cabinet officers? Can the Supreme Court meet without the Chief Justice? We've got a lot of questions. We'll try to see if we can resolve a few of those right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last week, I talked about how divided we are as a nation. That is the conclusion of David French in his book, Divided We Fall. I have been struck by the number of commentators who have been making the same point. In one of his opening monologues, Tucker Carlson admitted that you may have nothing in common with people on the other side of the country, but you're stuck with them. He dismissed the idea that groups of Americans will break off into separate, peaceful nations of like-minded citizens. After all, there's no such thing as a peaceful separation. Scott Moorfield starts his column by noting that there are some things we can all agree on. Murder and rape are bad. Love and kindness are good. But then he quickly moves to all the things left and right can't seem to agree on. Things like liberty, taxation, varying degrees of wokeness, critical race theory, free speech, abortion, self-defense, immigration, and the Second Amendment. Is there a solution to all this? Is this country headed to a two-state solution? Some use that phrase to describe what might be possible in Israel with the Palestinians. Most of us know it will never work there. It really isn't possible here either. As I've discussed on radio, even if you thought this would work, how would you divide America? We don't exactly have a Mason-Dixon line. The blue states are generally on the coast, with red states in the center of the country. Even red states have blue cities, and blue states often have vast red sections. Although we are a divided nation, we are tied to one another. Tucker Carlson says we are inseparably intertwined and like conjoined twins. Let's face it, separation isn't an option, even if we are a divided nation. These wise commentators are reminding us that we need each other. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. We're going to be talking about some of the things that President Biden has already done. But before we do that, let's get back to this issue of impeachment. Penna, there's just a lot of questions about whether or not the Chief Justice will be there, whether the Chief Justice will rule that it's constitutional or not, whether he even has to be there, since now we're talking about impeaching somebody who's not the president. Think us through some of these really important issues.
It's unprecedented, and that was the one question that we didn't even think of until we did think of it, was that, well, he's not president anymore, so maybe these constitutional rules about the Chief Justice don't apply because he's not president. I'm thinking ahead to the congressional elections in 2 years and like different campaigns. I mean, is this a campaign ad to say that, we successfully brought articles of impeachment against President Trump after he wasn't even president anymore? Can they be proud of that?
Yeah, it's, my analysis is, number one, this is about the impeachment of the president, the vice president, or civil officers. He is not the president, vice president, or civil officers. Therefore, it would be unconstitutional. Number two, it's about removal from office. Again, he's not in office. He's got to be in office. Unconstitutional. It also requires that if it's the president, the Chief Justice has to preside. The Chief Justice, then, it's not the court that's providing, it's the Chief Justice. So in my opinion, what probably would happen is Chief Justice Roberts would be asked to come and preside. I think Chief Justice Roberts automatically then has to make the decision himself, not the court, whether this is a constitutional impeachment, which I think he would quickly say, no, it's not. And therefore he can't come. Now, Penna's thought is, but what if they say, well, he's not the president anymore, so the Chief Justice doesn't have to be there? I still think the Chief Justice would have the responsibility to send a letter to the House and Senate saying, or maybe just the Senate, saying that under the Constitution, I'm required to be there. I cannot show up because this would be a part of what would be an unconstitutional impeachment process. We'll see. But this, to me, is something we've never seen before, and that we're going to, and then, again, when you get to the actual impeachment itself, it's got just tons of problems, right? No due process in the beginning. The article itself is really deficient. If it's enough, then pretty much almost every politician needs to be thrown out of office, because basically if they ever say anything no politician would ever say anything that's maybe a little, over the top, would they? And then if somebody else ever, commits some sort of offense or trespass or crime or whatever, then the politician is now responsible. We need to ramp up the criminal prosecutions if this is now the new law. It's not the law. It's never been the law. Incitement has specific definitions. This doesn't even get into the universe of an incitement. And in fact, he used the words peaceably in his speech. He said, let them hear your voices peaceably. And so it's just deficient unconstitutionally, factually, precedent, everything. And so I'm not exactly sure. This doesn't make a lot of sense. But it seems like it's going to really benefit the opponents of those who are in the administration. And so, but I think it's kind of the old Trump derangement syndrome that some people are so hate Trump. They're so obsessed that they can't see in front of them the good moves for themselves. And it's almost like it works to his benefit a lot, right? And that seems to be what's going on here, because this is bad on a lot of levels, and I don't think it's gonna help.
So there was talk about Speaker Pelosi sitting on this article of impeachment for a while,
right,
letting this administration get its start, confirm members of the cabinet, pass some laws, fulfill some campaign promises, sign some executive orders, all of that. But now that she sent it, right? So that was today. So they get it Monday.
Today or Monday? I didn't know.
It says Monday.
It will hit there Monday.
Right.
So this is what I don't know. Do you have to act on it very quickly? Like, are we supposed to be waiting for next week for this impeachment trial? And is that going to be something we're going to be paying attention to on Tuesday?
This is not in the Constitution, right? But it is, if you remember the last impeachment, Mitch McConnell, the Senate has always been about, they have a tradition, they have rules, they have impeachment rules that they've set in place through past impeachments, Clinton, all this, and that they said they didn't have the ability they had to hear it immediately. They had to set the process immediately. Then they had to start the impeachment, and no other business could be done. And so I don't know how you do that, though, in this case, because you have to have the ability to prepare your defense, right? You have to. So and are they going to try to change things because they're just going to throw out all the rules, all the I don't know. I guess they could do that, but if they follow what they've always followed, this creates a lot of problems. I think it just shuts all of Biden's agenda down. It means the Senate can only do the impeachment, and it would also mean that they have to follow their procedures and stuff, and due process has to be provided, and they have to be given some time to prepare their defense.
Mitch McConnell said that basically he was wanting to wait till mid-February so that Trump's defense team and the Democratic prosecutors have time to prepare. But then you get this counterpoint where Schumer says, well, I've been speaking to the Republican leader about the timing and duration of the trial, but make no mistake, the trial will be held in the United States Senate, and there will be a vote on whether to convict the president. He didn't say tomorrow, but he didn't also, he seemed to be disagreeing a little bit with that. So whether it ends up being the middle of February or not, I guess is up to Chuck Schumer right now, isn't it?
It is. And,
amazing.
There's this thing going on right now. They're still negotiating about how to run the Senate because the Senate's 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
So they're sharing, they're having to share committees and all this. And we're like, well, how does that work? I thought, the vice president breaks the tie. True. But the vice president can't be there every day. So they have to have, a process. And there's a tradition for this. It's 50-50. But here's the trick with the 50-50. It's 50-50. And if you have something that doesn't pass out of a committee, and all the committees will be 50-50, it can go to the floor. But there's an exception to that. What doesn't go to the floor are nominations.
There you go.
So all of Biden's nominations for all the cabinets, all the positions, everything could be completely stopped by the Republicans. So that's what Mitch McConnell has in his pocket to negotiate with in, getting whatever the rules they're going to play by are. So I say that to realize, because it might seem like, well, all the power is on the Democratic side. It's true. There's a lot of power, but not all the power. And there's been these 50-50 situations before, and McConnell does have some things to negotiate with, and behind the scenes, all that kind of stuff. He tried to use that, some of the articles said, to get a locked-in agreement about not getting rid of the filibuster. But evidently, he couldn't secure that, which is, again, a scary thing, because that would destroy the Senate, really, and create all kinds of horrible things, like packing the court, which would destroy the Supreme Court, and a number of other things. But right now, Manchin has been standing his ground, saying, I'm never going to do that, because that would destroy what the Senate is, which is a deliberative body that requires bipartisanship and et cetera. So there's this thing that you don't see a lot in public that's going on behind the scenes, this negotiation, and it might affect how the impeachment rules are done as well. I'm sure this is all in the mix right now as they're talking.
In the power sharing agreement, is the committee chairmanships, are they up for grabs in the Senate?
I think they're...
Or are they always going to go to the majority party?
I think they're dual, but I might be wrong. I think it's a committee sharing,
that's what I
whether
hear.
It's 50-50. Yeah. And so
there's no minority and no majority.
That's
They're
right.
50-50
That's
because
right.
the Senate's 50-50.
Exactly.
Haven't had one of those. We almost had those back in 2000. Remember when then all of a sudden then you had a senator in Vermont go, oh, wait a minute, I guess I'm not a Republican, I'm independent, Jeffords. But nevertheless, we really actually will see something we haven't seen before, which is pretty typical. 2020, 2021. Penna mentioned something about the vaccines. I want to come back and mention that just for a few minutes, because there has been some misreporting. I'm being nice. I think there's been some media bias from CNN about that, and some misstatements by the president, which led him to make his first of many, come on, give me a break, man. So we'll talk about that. And one of our first articles is about Anthony Fauci's back in the news, and Penna always has a comment about it, and I know Kelly has a comment or two about that, so we'll get into those. And then into the cancel culture. There are more and more people being canceled, and Kelly's even got a personal story there about that as well. So we've got a lot to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. And, you know, this is one of those places where we've said so often here on Point of View, have some discernment. And, of course, you know that if it comes from CNN, you probably want to have a little bit of discernment. And there were stories saying that there is evidence that the Trump campaign and the Trump administration and all of them had no actual vaccine strategy and no way to distribute that. And even Anthony Fauci said, now, wait a minute, that's not right. But it brings us back to a point that Penna made in passing because, of course, President Biden has said that he wanted to have 1 million COVID vaccine shots in the arms of American people by the first 100 days. So that's 1 million a day. And so you would say, well, he's also said that the previous administration had a dismal program. Well, I looked it up. You go to Bloomberg's tracker. So, you know, don't trust me, just trust Bloomberg, probably right. The best estimates are that under the administration up until Biden took over, they were averaging 939,000 doses every day. So if you want to go from 939,000 to 1 million, that's about 60,000 doses different. So how can you say that what the Trump administration was doing was dismal when it was getting almost 1 million doses in the arms of people every single day? And the Biden administration is now going to do a better job of 1 million doses. And when he was asked about this goal of 100 million vaccines, shouldn't you set the bar a little higher? Which I think is a good question. Yeah. And Joe Biden said, it's not possible. Come on, give me a break, man. So we'll be hearing that for a few times, won't we?
We will. So there were about 10 different executive orders about COVID that have been issued already. And one of them has to do with the World Health Organization, which we immediately pulled out of after COVID came along because of their terrible, egregious advice and assurances about COVID and how China was not at fault for spreading and all of that. Well, we're going back into World Health Organization. We'll be paying our back dues, and the head of the U.S. delegation to the World Health Organization will be Anthony Fauci. And so, you know, and he's trying to play both sides against the middle, to not critique Trump too much as he goes into that position. But yeah, so the vaccine is just going to help the situation, and the Biden administration will get credit because it's got like critical mass. FEMA now we hear is going to help distribute the vaccine nationwide. Also, Amazon has offered their help with all their distribution centers to help distribute. Why didn't they offer that to President Trump? We got to wonder. And I also heard that you'll be able to get it at like CVS pharmacies and other places across the country.
Yeah, there's, you know, what I keep seeing with Biden is there was all this thing that Trump was doing it all wrong and that they were going to make it. And everything that he's doing is like just continuing what Trump's been doing. I mean, there really has been no dramatic change in anything. The vaccines are already almost at 1 million a month, and that's what he's saying his goal is for the 100 days, 1 million a day. And so you look at this and you're like, well, where is the new thinking and the new, you know, it's really odd. And I just, be honest, go back, you know, a year ago and say that Trump wasn't president. Say that Biden was president then. I mean, do you really think we would have a vaccine right now? I don't. What Trump has got all of his faults, but the thing he did is he tends to think about private business, innovation, and he's kind of a bully, and so he pushed them, kicked them, and said we're gonna get these private companies involved with the government. We're going to bring some money. We're going to give them incentive. We're going to tell them to go ahead and make all these millions of vials of the vaccine before it's proven, so that if it's proven, we don't have to wait. And there are all these things that had never been done that he did. And so, but, nobody wants to give him credit because they don't like him. They don't want to give him credit for what he did. But, I really think if Biden were president, we don't know. We'd have to go back. I think it's highly unlikely that we would even have a vaccine by now, because that has not been the history of our country and what normally we would have been waiting years normally. And so again, it's sad that I wish Biden would just be honest and say, you know what, we've got a great start. We're going to try to make it better. Here's what we're going to do. I think Americans want that kind of authenticity. Just be straight with people instead of, and especially now, he doesn't have to try to create Trump as the boogeyman on, all this stuff. He's president. So just be honest and talk about things, and not, I'm going to do this thing, and that Trump didn't even have a plan when there's about 1 million vaccines in the arm a day right now. It's really bizarre to watch how they're treating this. And again, it's not necessary, and they're just going to lose. You're going to hurt your own credibility, and you're going to lose people you could gain.
What do you all think about the effort to, like, for instance, get FEMA or have it be more of a national response rather than the states then getting it out to the counties and the cities? And some states have had problems, and there have been complaints because my city doesn't have enough vaccines. I had to wait, whatever. So, but is the answer for the federal government to take it over? I think a lot of times when that happens, you actually hamstring the innovation that's happening at the state and local level and make it worse.
Yeah, it's a bad idea. Let's look at how wonderful the government was in rolling out Obamacare. That wasn't the states. That was the federal government. They couldn't even get the website to work, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a lot more innovation, and the more you give people responsibility, the more things happen. If everybody's sitting around waiting for the federal government to arrange everything,
there you go.
It takes a long time. Whereas if instead you say, hey, we're going to send you these, everybody's kind of moving into action and setting things into place. There are a lot of kinks to this because, to be honest, this is a huge thing, and it's something that takes the kinks getting out. It takes a while, and they're getting there. They're learning, but a lot of mistakes. I look at New York, the mistakes of telling people they can't get it because they don't meet criteria 1. They're in criteria 2, and say they're in the second class versus the first. So they would let vials lapse in time. You got to learn, and they've learned that now. You had the mayor de Blasio versus the governor Cuomo, and they had a little fight over that. So everybody's learning these things, and they're getting better, and I think they'll continue to get better. But I do think we sure conveniently forget that this is not normal. It's not normal for us to have a vaccine in this amount of time. I don't. You might know, Kirby. Is it 4 years? I forget what the normal. And even they're usually, a lot of times they're not successful.
That's right.
They have to back off. So what's happened here is really, you got to give credit to the ingenuity, but
sure. That
comes from somebody kind of like Trump, who's kind of a bully, kicking them in the rear end and saying, "You will do this," and he kind of used the stick and the carrot, right? Mm-hmm. Providing billions of dollars and also kind of doing that, and it's been a good thing.
Again, providing money and saying we're going to buy the vaccine even if it doesn't work, which fortunately it did. And so just something that you would never have imagined. And the point I'm making just a minute ago is when CNN says that there was no evidence that there was any vaccine distribution plan. And they're, of course, just repeating what, of course, the Biden administration is saying. You would hope that somewhere along the line there'd be enough discernment to say, wait a minute, we have something actually going ahead. And that's one place where we give Anthony Fauci some credit. We've certainly been critical of him. He actually, when CNN asked him about that, and some of the others said, no, wait a minute, we've been doing this for some time. We can make it better. And he certainly likes being in the spotlight now and not under the shadow of Donald Trump. But at least he was trying to explain the fact that when you have people say that there was no distribution plan, That just doesn't even pass the straight face test. You could say it was an inadequate distribution plan. You could say that it was flawed, but to say that there was none, I mean, it's just hard for people to believe that.
It is. Well, it's not true. And I mean, you know, you've gone too far. There were a number of liberal sources yesterday who were saying,
"Oh, come on,
this is not." They didn't say, "Oh, come on, man," like the president.
No, but they might have said, "Oh, I got my shot yesterday."
But they didn't say, "Oh, come on, man," in the media way. There's like, you can't say this. This is just silly. This is way over the line.
So again, use some discernment, read more than one source, and that'll be helpful. We come back, I want to talk about the cancel culture. They're talking about canceling, what is it, Franklin Graham, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley. I mean, the list is a long list. Kelly's got a personal story that you want to hear, and that comes up right after this.
Whenever there's a new session of Congress, the House of Representatives adopts a new set of rules to govern the way it conducts business. For the 117th Congress, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Rules Committee Chairman James McGovern have proposed a rules package they claim makes the House of Representatives the most inclusive in history. There's a section that eliminates all gendered terms. If the rules package is adopted by the full House, only gender-inclusive language will be allowed in House rules. So, where the terms father and mother now appear in the House Code of Official Conduct, they would be replaced with parent. Husband and wife would be spouse. Son and daughter would be child. And brother and sister would be sibling. Then it really gets awkward. Aunt and uncle must be replaced with parent-sibling, and cousin must be sibling's child. And for the in-laws, the new terms are parent-in-law, child-in-law, and sibling-in-law. Grandson and granddaughter would be out. Grandchild would be used instead. Stepmother, stepfather, stepson, stepdaughter, stepbrother, and stepsister are out. Step-parent, stepchild, and step-sibling are in, and so on. In Rule 10 of the House, the word seaman appears. It would have to be replaced with seafarer. Chairman would be replaced with chair. These language requirements are for House rules, not floor speeches or bills. But this hat tip to the far left's desire to eliminate every distinction between the sexes is silly and just makes it harder to communicate clearly. Believe me, there will be more of this pronoun and other gender-neutral policy nonsense. The proposed new rules establish a permanent Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Expect affirmative action and quota requirements for the hiring of House staff. In its Blueprint for Positive Change, the Human Rights Campaign laid out a list of 85 recommendations to the administration to elevate and enact LGBTQ policy demands. It appears that leaders in Congress are already acting on it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We have a lot to talk about. Let me just mention that after the top of the hour, we'll get to one issue, and that is Coach Kennedy. People always asking what's happening with that court case, so we'll give you an update there. Of course, we have already mentioned that it's the 48th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. Want to talk about that. Some of the things that have been implemented by the Biden administration already that are really concerning. But just before the top of the hour, Penna, let me come to you first. We're seeing, of course, the cancel culture. I've got my Rod Dreyer book here, Live Not by Lies, in which we've been talking about the fact that maybe we won't have the hard to totalitarianism that comes from the government, although I'm starting to see some of that too. But he was suggesting the soft totalitarianism, where whether it's social media, whether it's corporations, whether it's private entities try to cancel people. And if you start the list, I won't go through all of them, but I mentioned people want, for example, who would have even guessed that you would have been actually calling for the resignation of somebody in the Billy Graham organization, that you would be calling for the individuals who have Harvard degrees, Ted Cruz and Dan Crenshaw, and all the other things that are happening would actually unfold. But this cancel culture really has begun to develop on steroids, I guess you could say, and things I would never have thought before. Franklin Graham's supposed to step down. Where'd that come from?
Step down not only from the Billy Graham Association, but also Samaritan's Purse, which he started and has done such good work around the world.
Yes.
Because of his, it's most of it right now is because of people supporting the process of making sure the certification of the election was done properly, and all that went on January 6th was supposed to be about that. It actually took place after, a lot of violence and destruction. It took place in a constitutional manner. And that nobody can be criticized for throwing out the Constitution for supporting that. But Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, wants to remove his own colleagues, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, for supporting that.
I did not see that coming.
I didn't either. I mean, Joe Manchin is the most moderate, most conservative Democrat. In fact, he's friends with Ted Cruz. So, to do that. And then, of course, Harvard University talking about pulling the degrees of Kayleigh McEnany, who got her law degree there, Ted Cruz, Dan Crenshaw, and a New York Representative Elsie Stefanik. And then not being able to buy MyPillow products at Kohl's and Bed Bath & Beyond because Mike Lindell has also supported that. And then, the other cancel component that really floored me was that 12 National Guardsmen that were supposed to be guarding the Capitol, out of all the thousands, during the inauguration, were sent home because of their, posts on social media. And then Parler is actually canceled, too, because it was thrown off everything. Trump was canceled because he's thrown off social media. So it's just, that's the attitude right now. And I think, you mentioned that it's not the government doing it. No, but I think in other totalitarian regimes, it's sometimes been other entities outside of government that have gotten the ball rolling, laid the groundwork for it. But then, the government then comes in and enforces that later. So, we have to, as free Americans with a Constitution, and as believers who actually, we actually have a higher authority than government or politics. We have our work cut out for us right now to fight against this.
One of the chapters there is on courage, which I think we're going to have to talk about.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I think it's a clarion call to everybody who listens to Point of View, and really every believer. This is a very unusual time. It's an attempt to silence people. If you think that silencing people is not going to lead quickly to silencing the gospel, you're insane, right? I mean, it's obvious. And in fact, it's already started in some places. And so the necessity of this is to refuse to be silenced, because it doesn't work unless you go along with it. And people have to speak out. I mean, Bonhoeffer, right? Silence in the face of evil is sin. And people, some of people are doing this because they have evil intent. And they want to change our country into where there's not a marketplace of ideas, where people aren't allowed to express their own opinions, where we don't treat each other with respect. But some people are just carried away. They hate Trump. They just are all emotional, and they join these, they should be canceled, and they forget what they're creating. Something that they would never want created when the other party comes into power and somebody else is president. It really is bizarre that you win the election and the result is not to be glad and excited about where you're going, but the first thing you want to do is destroy other people because they supported the losing side. That's really odd. I mean, it's not normal, and it's not healthy. It's I don't know. I don't have words to do it. I'll give you an example. You mentioned my wife has a little part-time job where she teaches Chinese kids English over the internet, and it's a group called VIP Kids. And well, they have a number of Facebook groups have started with teachers who do this because they share information with each other over, hey, this is something that really worked with my child who was struggling with this part of learning English, and they share information. And so she's been in one of these that had tons of teachers in it. And all of a sudden there's these posts, I think this morning, about Joe Biden and about the presidency and about all this stuff, all this, so glad, feel like I can breathe again and all this. And it's on the VIP, this VIP, it's not their official page. It's somebody that's done this. And so she responds with just a quick deal that says, gosh, do we really have to bring politics? This page is about teachers. And well, the next thing she knows, the person who runs this page, who she didn't know who it was before, his name is Darren. He relates into this, if you support, and she didn't say anything about supporting the president. If you support him, then you need to evaluate yourself. And then somebody else calls her a white supremacist. And there's like a list of all these horrible attacks. And she's immediately thrown out to where she can't respond. And so this to me is, and by the way, then 30 of these, I don't know how to describe them. Rats is too nice of a term. They then migrate in their little rat kingdom to her personal page and start posting really horrible things on her own personal page. And so it's the ultimate example of bullying. But the example to me is this Darren person. What a coward. I mean, what a sissy of a person. Okay. Somebody says something and really a very appropriate thing, can we just keep politics off? Let's just talk about teaching the kids, right? And so what you do is you start a personal attack on a woman, and then you delete her ability to even respond. This is cancel culture. It is coward. Cowards do this. People who can't respond and have a discussion, they're so scared of their lack of intellect of their side that they can't even have an open discussion. And it's everything against our country is for. This is about the marketplace of ideas. This is about getting to better solutions because we have more voices. This is about people learning about Jesus Christ because there's a freedom to share that truth. And this is now under attack, not just in the government, but through major corporations that have tons of power. And if we don't speak up, it will happen. And if we don't stand against it, it will happen. So this is a really important time for freedom. And I mean, we're going to have lots of cases on this at First Liberty, but it's got to go beyond that. This has got to be a cultural shaming of this type of conduct. It's unacceptable, and people have to say it's unacceptable. Tons of people who voted for Biden should step up when they see this and say, this is morally wrong.
We need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll give you an update on Coach Kennedy. All that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, it's this last hour when we will try to do our best to fit in a few more things. One of those, of course, is the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. One of the articles here about a slush fund payout to left-wing groups, that was something done under the Obama administration, stopped under the Trump administration, and reinstituted as well. 17 different executive orders that we'll talk about as well. Those are all topics we'll try to get into this hour. Penna Dexter's Viewpoints commentary on banning gendered terms and Congress. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But if there's one thing that I hear with some frequency when I used to travel, of course, last year we haven't done so much travel, people always say, Kelly, what about that, it was a pastor, was a coach or whatever, he prayed and then lost his job. Well, it's Coach Kennedy, who actually prayed in the middle of the field. And it is something that people have been asking about for years. And I might just mention, if they go to your website, we have a link to it, firstliberty.org. There is a release in which you have, Hiram Sasser, who's been on the program, Stuart Shepard, and others, interview with Coach Kennedy, and all that because you've got a very important case before the Ninth Circuit, right?
Yeah, I would encourage people to listen to this. They interview Hiram talking about the case, and if they do that, this is First Liberty Live, where we have all of our interviews, our videos of cases and different things. And what they can do down at the bottom of that page is they can subscribe, because what's going to happen Monday is you're told when something's coming up in case you want to watch it, or you can watch it later because it's taped. So Monday, you can actually watch the oral argument. I mean, it's the Federal Court of Appeals. I'm going to do a quick, play-by-play beforehand so people know what to watch for. We're then going to have the argument, and then the next day, we're going to talk about what all that means and what happened.
Is this going to be at your website?
Yeah.
We'll be able to watch the actual...
You can. We're going to bring in the argument so that people can watch. And this is the Ninth Circuit. So, as Rush Limbaugh calls it, the Ninth Circus. It traditionally has been the most liberal federal court of appeals. And we've got the same panel, unfortunately, that we had last time.
Oh, boy.
So those who don't know, Coach Kennedy was a Marine for 20 years, became a coach, made a pledge to God after every game to go to a knee and just thank God for the privilege of coaching his players. And he did that for 7 years until they came to him and said, if you go to a knee again, we're going to fire you. And, he fought for these freedoms for a reason. He's like, I've got to. I made a pledge to God. And so he went by himself. And, people after the game, they go and slap the other coach on the backside and say, great game and all this. Coach Kennedy, while all that's going on, he goes by himself to a knee, says a 20-second prayer, and he's fired. And, we filed a lawsuit. It goes into court. The Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit, not friendly, said that coaches are not allowed to pray in public if anyone can see them, which is not the law, but it's what they want the law to be. We went to the Supreme Court. They did not take the case, but they said, we want you to, this is the four conservatives wrote a concurring to not taking it at the time, but said, we want you to go back down. There's some facts we want you to develop. They said that they found the Ninth Circuit's decision very troubling. And then they sort of sent a signal to us that there's been a free exercise case called Smith that has caused incredible damage to the free exercise clause for 30 years. And they invited us to bring back that case up that they would like to reconsider it. Now, this is the 4 conservatives. This is before Amy Coney Barrett was on the court. So this case, we're probably not going to get this is the same panel that said coaches can't pray in public, right? We're probably going to get a rough decision from the Ninth Circuit. But I really think there's a high likelihood that this goes back to the Supreme Court, and it could be the vehicle for which we see the free exercise clause restored to what the founders intended, which would provide more protection for religious freedom than any of us have seen in our lifetime, and maybe coming at exactly the right time. But this will be really important, and so a lot of times people don't get to see these things up close, and so I would encourage people, if they want to know about the case, if they want to watch, the easy thing is go to firstliberty.org, and when you click into that First Liberty Live, subscribe on the bottom so that you'll be told when these things come up, and you can watch if you want, or you can even watch later if you want to. But it's a great way to remind yourself, at the very least, to pray for Coach Kennedy on Monday, to pray for that argument on Monday, because it's going to affect everybody across the country with regard to religious freedom.
You know, it's interesting how even under a cancel culture, the Constitution still exists. We still have these court cases, and fortunately, what happened in the last administration with appointing judges leaves the landscape in the courts way better off than 4 years ago. So this case that took place back in the 80s, the Smith decision, that has made, and you can probably explain this a lot better than I am because I'm not an attorney, but the Establishment Clause has been used against religious liberty a lot of times, and there will. Just as in the Bladensburg case, which was the
Lemon case.
Lemon, for the Establishment Clause. This would be the Free Exercise Clause, right? So the Free Exercise Clause would be now maybe opened up and be able to, these cases would be able to be decided differently.
Yes.
So just as Bladensburg was really a shot in the arm for religious liberty and cited in other cases afterward, and still will be down the road. This same thing, and they've already signaled that they would probably take this at the Supreme Court, right?
They said, we noticed that the first claim to reach us in this case is a free speech claim. They said maybe that's because of the Smith decision that's caused so much damage to the Free Exercise Clause over the past 30 years. So not a subtle. And then they said, but we haven't. That's pretty
clear.
And then here's the next sentence. But we haven't been asked to review that decision yet. I mean,
so that's what you're doing now, right?
So that's what we're trying to do, and this would really restore us back to the free exercise. I mean, right now, if you watch cases very closely, 95% of every religious liberty case is a free speech case, because they can't bring a free exercise clause claim because they can't win under this bad decision, and so they have to bring it as free speech, and that's not what the founders intended. They wanted the free exercise of religion to be protected from the government, and this could restore that. And all the cases you hear about, this would affect all those cases. The bakers, the florists, all of them. All of a sudden, they would have protection. And in fact, I mean, one of the things that President Biden just did was an executive order that required transgenderism and LGBT and all this through every government agency, every federal government agency, every program. Well, now if you're a Christian organization that feeds the homeless or takes care of kids or you name it, all and you work through a federal government program, well, you're not kicked off. So it's more important that you be pro-transgender, which a church can't be if they have biblical beliefs. They have biblical beliefs on marriage and a man and a woman. It's more important that you kick people out of homeless shelters and that you not have these churches, these religious organizations participating. I think we win those lawsuits under the Free Exercise Clause if we're able to get victories here.
Well, here's our action item. Go to First Liberty and sign up for First Liberty Live. Then you can watch it. And we'll take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Last week, I talked about how divided we are as a nation. That is the conclusion of David French in his book, Divided We Fall. I have been struck by the number of commentators who have been making the same point. In one of his opening monologues, Tucker Carlson admitted that you may have nothing in common with people on the other side of the country, but you're stuck with them. He dismissed the idea that groups of Americans will break off into separate, peaceful nations of like-minded citizens. After all, there's no such thing as a peaceful separation. Scott Moorfield starts his column by noting that there are some things we can all agree on. Murder and rape are bad. Love and kindness are good. But then he quickly moves to all the things left and right can't seem to agree on. Things like liberty, taxation, varying degrees of wokeness, critical race theory, free speech, abortion, self-defense, immigration, and the Second Amendment. Is there a solution to all this? Is this country headed to a two-state solution? Some use that phrase to describe what might be possible in Israel with the Palestinians. Most of us know it will never work there. It really isn't possible here either. As I've discussed on radio, even if you thought this would work, how would you divide America? We don't exactly have a Mason-Dixon line. The blue states are generally on the coast, with red states in the center of the country. Even red states have blue cities, and blue states often have vast red sections. Although we are a divided nation, we are tied to one another. Tucker Carlson says we are inseparably intertwined and like conjoined twins. Let's face it, separation isn't an option, even if we are a divided nation. These wise commentators are reminding us that we need each other. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, certainly one of the things we wanted to talk about is the 48th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. And one of the things that's so striking is we're so used to the March for Life. Now, we had a virtual March for Life, but it's certainly not the same. But I thought we'd go around the table for just a minute since we've been talking about the Supreme Court. Maybe we can go back 48 years and see why even Ruth Bader Ginsburg and others acknowledged that this case of Roe versus Wade was poorly argued based on this idea of right to privacy. They did not decide when life begins. And Kelly, I'll come to you for a minute, but I know Penna's got some comments as well about the fact that this legacy is a deadly legacy that has lost 60 million lives of unborn babies. But just from a legal point of view, I think if you're honest, you have to say this was a poorly argued case, and it's right down there at the bottom of the barrel with Dred Scott, I would say.
Yeah, it's, I mean, look, it's not just you saying that. I mean, there are actually many articles written by liberals pointing out that this is kind of an embarrassing legal and, you know, as far as from a point of intelligence and jurisprudence, it's not a very good case. It's also a bad case because of what it does. But I think, I mean, most people, if you sit them down and say, here's the Constitution, please read this. And then I want your test at the end is going to be, is the right to an abortion in this Constitution? Assuming they're not like really, partisans in this issue or whatever, I think you get close to 100%. I would say not in there. And so that's the problem is if it's not in the Constitution, then it's supposed to be left to the states and to the people. And so I think that's where we will end up.
Yes.
I don't know how long that's going to take, but I do think my prediction is within the next 3, 4, 5 years, that's where we will be. Now, but that doesn't mean this issue of sanctity of life is now over. It means it would go to the states. And now you'd be battling this out in the states. So the question is, what if this is an issue that you're really involved in, what are you doing in your state to get ready? Because it's coming. And what you don't want is it comes to you and then you're back to the same place where you started because nobody was ready to advocate for the sanctity of life and to put people in place to do all you need to do to make sure that your state has a good law and a good policy and a good protection as well.
Well, some states are trying to get ready, and they have their limitations on abortion struck down by the courts. Some states actually get them upheld, and that's always nice. Some states are trying to get ready, and they're actually passing such loose laws about abortion that they'll be ready to be the abortion meccas if Roe versus Wade is struck down. I'm thinking about New York when a couple of years ago they celebrated a law that would basically allow abortion all the way to the end, and it would allow it to be done by non-doctors, would require people to do it, and all of that. So this administration is doing things on the life issue that are actually reversing some of the good work that President Trump did. And one thing that's just terrible, I think, about Joe Biden's changing position on the Hyde Amendment.
Yes,
the Hyde Amendment is attached
to
a lot of legislation that helps people, that says that no taxpayer funds will be used for this. So our tax dollars, we who do not support abortion, our tax dollars should not be going to pay for it. Well, he agreed with the Hyde Amendment for most of his career until a couple of years ago.
During the campaign when he got pressure.
Yeah, he was pressured. In fact, it was the day after he said he supported the Hyde Amendment that he changed his position. And so they'll repeal the Hyde Amendment. They won't pass Hyde Amendments to go with any appropriations or anything under this administration. They may pass it, but he won't sign it. They're restoring federal funding to Planned Parenthood. That's been a campaign promise. Also, the Mexico City policy, which Trump made, the Mexico City policy, which banned foreign organizations from receiving U.S. funding, providing abortions or abortion referrals. And Trump expanded this and made this so that we were not sending anything hardly overseas for abortion. That's been reversed by the Biden administration. They promised to codify Roe versus Wade. It's never been made a law. They promised to codify and put it into law. They also want to renew legal actions against nonprofits like Little Sisters of the Poor, as Kelly was mentioning. All those reversals. The House, of course, is trying to pass right during during Roe v. Wade anniversary when they have the March for Life. Usually the U.S. House will pass something or try to pass something that's pro-life. So they passed 3 bills that are pro-life. The Abortion is Not Healthcare Act is one of those. There are things that will never pass the House right now, but they at least try to introduce those. The Freedom Caucus chairman reintroduced 3 pro-life bills. So that's really what's happening right now. And, if you live in a conservative, pro-life state, then you can continue to work on the issue and have some success. And so that's what I encourage people to do.
And again, you talked about Hyde Amendment, Planned Parenthood, the Mexico City policy. One other one I thought I'd just mention, we have safety regulations on the issue of chemical abortions, RU486, prostaglandins and things like that. They want to eliminate all of this. So if this is supposed to be pro-woman and pro-life, well, obviously it's not. And they also want to try to limit what states can do to even protect individuals. And so that is, again, where the heavy hand of the federal government's coming down on some of the states that have 24-hour waiting periods, conformed consent, and things of that nature.
Yes. I mean, even to require admitting privileges for a doctor that does abortions, it sounds like a safety issue for women. And they've had so much trouble getting these types of things through the courts. And it just seems counterintuitive if you care about women. But the lobby, Planned Parenthood and others, that abortion lobby is, they're on everything, and they are just relentless.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's clear, and you kind of knew this beforehand, but under the Biden administration, LGBT will trump everything, and so will pro-abortion. It'll trump whatever else is in the way, and you're going to see that. So, for instance, we just mentioned pro-women. I mean, a big contingency that moved away from Trump to Biden were suburban women, and yet look at what just happened with all of their daughters. I mean, right there on the first or second day he's in office, the first thing they do is basically make sure that if their girls are trying to get scholarships and they're in sports, that now they're going to have to compete against people who are physically male. I mean, we've seen numerous examples of this already, where it keeps people from getting those college scholarships. It knocks them out of the state, qualifying. It's not fair to have physical males compete. I mean, what you're doing there is you're basically destroying women's sports. And so that's something that I'm sure most people who live in the suburbs know is wrong, and they don't want that for their daughters.
But they didn't. I guess they didn't realize.
That was going to be part of the bargain. And so these are the things that are happening pretty quickly. So those are the priorities, right? What should have been the priorities were things that you kind of got huge majorities on, like let's work on this pandemic, and let's see how we can get people back to work. And instead, it's like we're going to knock out the XL pipeline and take 11,000 jobs away from people, and you can just go down the list of all the jobs lost already by the new regulations. And it's like the opposite of the very people. I mean, I don't know if people saw, but the union complaining, who had voted for, who supported Biden, was now going, what are you doing? You're destroying all of our jobs. And you're like, well, didn't you know that they were going to do that? I guess not. I guess not.
We're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to get into a couple of issues, because one of the things that was done during the Obama administration was this slush fund payout. And that is where, when the Justice Department brings a case and then wins the case, and they oftentimes don't even have to win the case, because when you go against the federal government, Kelly can speak to that issue, what ends up happening is they settle. Well, then the fine, instead of going to the federal treasury, instead goes to some of these left-wing groups. And so that was something that was done under the Obama administration. As you know, it was pretty much ended under the Trump administration, and it's back again. So it's just one of many things. And of course, Kelly's talked about this decision, for example, to end the Keystone XL pipeline. There's 11,000 jobs right there. What about the decision to actually stop and at the moment freeze any deportations? Some of those are deportations of individuals that are not here under good circumstances, but may have actually committed crimes. And so how does that make you safe? How does that help jobs? So we'll get into some of those issues. And most importantly, since we started talking about Roe versus Wade, I knew we'd get some phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter's commentary also will get into the banning of gendered terms, and we'll talk about what that means. And we have a lot more to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees, and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Let me just mention that we have a number of articles you're going to want to read. We mentioned already about Anthony Fauci back in the spotlight, a piece that I thought was very good that Penna sent along, a dysfunctional government, and that comes from the Wall Street Journal. One I want to focus on right now about the slush fund payouts, and then one after that on the thousands of pipeline jobs lost. One on the 1776 Commission, which I've been talking about this week, but maybe I'll get to next week because hopefully we're going to have some of the people that actually participated in that. But we have the piece by Victor Davis Hanson. There's some other ones by the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. And then Kelly passed on one by our good friend Joe LoConte. Haven't had him on. Well, I guess we had him on this year, but we haven't had him on too often. But again, Reagan's Fight for American Renewal. So those are some great articles for you to find. Of course, Penna Dexter's commentary here on banning gendered terms, and we'll get some of your phone calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. But this one, I think, illustrates the corruption. Some people have felt that maybe there's some corruption in the Biden family. You think? Well, here we go again. And that is, it has been a tradition in the past that when the Justice Department gets any kind of penalties, those go to the federal treasury. And somehow Barack Obama, in his administration, was able to figure out a way to actually create essentially a slush fund, which then went and took that money and put it in the hands as payouts to left-wing groups. And that has returned once again. So that is our third article. And it is a good example of the kind of corruption we've been trying to prevent in the federal government.
Yeah, I think wasn't it like $350 million or something? It was pretty large amount of money.
$650 million.
$650.
Yeah,
okay.
Even more than that. Yes.
Yeah, and the first thing that Sessions did when he came in as Attorney General is say this is not right. This is abuse of the federal government. And the other thing that you saw during the Obama administration is left-wing kind of crazy groups filing a lawsuit against the federal government.
There you go.
And then the federal government going, oh, well, we'll just settle and pay you, name the amount of money.
What a racket.
And so that kind of stuff does not need to, it
doesn't need to come back.
It doesn't need to come back. And the idea that they're not willing to keep those regulations, those new rules that the DOJ put in is disturbing. That should not happen in the United States. That is not what the Justice Department is supposed to do.
Do they get to decide? This is their rule, right?
Yeah, that's the problem. They're willing to throw out a rule that any normal American will go, well, of course you don't do that. But they can kind of do what they want. But it's gonna require people to really highlight when they do any of this, so that the general public knows, and it actually turns out to be something that hurts them and therefore will stop. The Biden administration would stop.
It kind of sounds like the Justice Department needs to police itself.
They should, and they did under the Trump administration. There are two different attorney generals, really three, I guess. But we'll see what happens here. Now, I do think it's Merrick Garland, right? Isn't that who we're talking about?
Yes, that is true.
And Merrick Garland is much more of a moderate Democrat, not on the leftist side with some of the extreme stuff. So I think he's a person, from what I know, he seems to be a person of integrity. So hopefully he will not do that, but we'll have to wait and see.
One of the other questions I wanted to maybe put on the table is what some of the states can do, because right now there are people that are listening saying, okay, you made my day even worse by talking about some of these problems, but there are solutions, one coming from Congress and encouraging your elected member of Congress to raise those issues, but the other is the states. And I have in front of me here what the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has done, in which he's going to sue the Biden administration over their decision to freeze any kind of deportation of people that are here illegally. Now, we recognize that certainly there was a push by the Biden administration to reinstate the DACA program, but that we're not talking about necessarily those people that are fine, outstanding potential citizens of America. We're talking about individuals that have criminal records that are not being deported either. And so Ken Paxton has said border states like Texas pay a particularly high price when the federal government fails to faithfully execute the country's immigration laws. And it seems to me, Kelly, that there's another solution, and that is if you find yourself in a state where you have an attorney general that maybe has some concerns about the federal government, in some cases they can bring suits there as well and maybe get a federal judge to issue an injunction, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot of the state attorneys generals, that are going to bring lawsuits when these type of overreaches occur. I mean, in a bizarre sort of way, this is actually the best landscape for religious freedom. At First Liberty, that we've been looking at this and going, okay, so we have a situation where we have more conservative judges who actually believe in the Constitution, who care about religious freedom, who are very bright, probably more than we've ever had right now, all the way from the Supreme Court on down. At the same time, we have a new administration that included within it are a lot of people who are obviously way left. Right? I mean, there are moderate people, but they're way left. We are going to see some massive overreaches. I mean, we all know that. And we've heard some of them. I mean, when you're willing to go after the Little Sisters of the Poor after everything that's happened over the past, 12 years, that you're kind of not balanced. Let's go after the nuns who are helping the poor in New York. Let's see if we can force them to provide abortion-causing drugs for the other nuns. I mean, it's like everybody in the country is like, what are you doing, right? Well, so if you have a landscape where you've got all these judges newly installed, along with others who are really committed to the Constitution, committed to religious freedom, very bright, and at the same time you have all this target-rich environment with all these real overreaches that are like horrible factual scenarios for you if you're on the other side, then it's actually the perfect place to file lawsuits, win great decisions, set great precedents for religious freedom. So as First Liberty, when we look at this right now, we're like, well, it's going to be ugly. There's going to be a lot of attacks on religious freedom, but we think it might be the best time ever for religious freedom and how we're going to advance things and set things in place that'll be precedents for decades to come.
That might be true for some other things when you think about, like, for instance, the deportations. You could also maybe do a lawsuit about stopping the construction of the wall. You could do lawsuits about them reversing a lot of the deregulation that's going to start to cost states money. So states that were going to suffer because of that would have standing to sue. You would have, I think there should be lawsuits about all of this transgender regulating, the idea of women's sports being opened up to men, the idea of the bathrooms now. I mean, we've already gone back and forth with it, but I think there could be more lawsuits with regard to that. So, and that's just one big gift that was given to us by the last administration was the judges.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. Yeah. That we have judges who they just weren't picked this way before. In the past, it was a lot of politics. It's a lot of so-and-so is my brother's friend, and et cetera. And that wasn't how the Trump administration did it. They looked at judicial philosophy, qualifications. I mean, liberal and conservative publications all said these are the most highly credentialed group of judges ever. In other words, they're very bright. They have impressive backgrounds, but they were picked not for politics for the most part. They were picked based upon their understanding that they're not a legislator. Their job is to follow the text, its original meaning. That's why originalism is the issue. And so that's it takes them back to what do the words of the Constitution say? Not what does some bad decision written in the 60s by a bunch of liberals say. What does the Constitution say? And so that's huge, and it's going to be really important as overreach occurs over the next however many years.
There's another aspect of that. We were talking about the administration. Right now, there's a lot of Trump people still in office, and I'm writing a booklet that's going to come out in the future on the deep state. And if you go to Wikipedia right now, they say the deep state's just a conspiracy theory. There's nobody on the bureaucracy that was fighting against Trump, and you found some of those articles that surfaced 4 years ago. the articles that are surfacing now, I found one the other day saying, we're really concerned because Trump has created a deep state. A lot of these individuals that are in the administration, some of them now have gone into the civil service area, and they're going to be there forever. And so there's been a flip, and all of a sudden now you're starting to see some of the liberals saying, you know what, we can't even necessarily assume that the administration's going to necessarily support Joe Biden. So what goes around comes around. And I thought that was kind of an interesting example of that. When we come back, though, some of you want to talk about abortion. We can certainly get to that, but also Penna Dexter's commentary, which you can hear right now, on banning gendered terms. This is something that was implemented in the House of Representatives, and it's just another one of those sad traditions that needs to end real quickly. So we will talk about that right after this.
Whenever there's a new session of Congress, the House of Representatives adopts a new set of rules to govern the way it conducts business. For the 117th Congress, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Rules Committee Chairman James McGovern have proposed a rules package they claim makes the House of Representatives the most inclusive in history. There's a section that eliminates all gendered terms. If the rules package is adopted by the full House, only gender-inclusive language will be allowed in House rules. So, where the terms father and mother now appear in the House Code of Official Conduct, they would be replaced with parent. Husband and wife would be spouse. Son and daughter would be child. And brother and sister would be sibling. Then it really gets awkward. Aunt and uncle must be replaced with parent-sibling, and cousin must be sibling's child. And for the in-laws, the new terms are parent-in-law, child-in-law, and sibling-in-law. Grandson and granddaughter would be out. Grandchild would be used instead. Stepmother, stepfather, stepson, stepdaughter, stepbrother, and stepsister are out. Step-parent, stepchild, and step-sibling are in, and so on. In Rule 10 of the House, the word seaman appears. It would have to be replaced with seafarer. Chairman would be replaced with chair. These language requirements are for House rules, not floor speeches or bills. But this hat tip to the far left's desire to eliminate every distinction between the sexes is silly and just makes it harder to communicate clearly. Believe me, there will be more of this pronoun and other gender-neutral policy nonsense. The proposed new rules establish a permanent Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Expect affirmative action and quota requirements for the hiring of House staff. In its Blueprint for Positive Change, the Human Rights Campaign laid out a list of 85 recommendations to the administration to elevate and enact LGBTQ policy demands. It appears that leaders in Congress are already acting on it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, we'll get a phone call in just a minute, but if you listen online, you have heard Penna Dexter's commentary. And by the way, if you want to sign up, you can receive mine Monday through Friday, hers on Saturday, banning gendered terms. I've had a few questions about that because the House of Representatives, primarily Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, wants to get rid of all these gendered terms. So tell us a little bit more, Penna, if you might.
Yes, I mean, she's doing it, and she's doing it with the chairman of the Rules Committee, James McGovern, in the rules package, because they adopt a new rules package every time there's a new session of Congress. So this one eliminates all gendered terms, and it only uses quote unquote gender inclusive language allowed in the House rules. So For instance, you say father and mother, you'd have to say parent. Okay, fine. Husband and wife, you have to say spouse. Son and daughter, child. That's all, Maybe that's not all that hard. But it gets very awkward later when they say aunt and uncle need to be called. Instead of aunt and uncle, they need to be called in the house rules parent, sibling. Cousin has to be called sibling's child.
Okay, that just gets out of hand.
Step-parent and stepchild and step-sibling are to be used instead of stepmother, stepfather, stepson, stepdaughter, stepbrother, stepsister. So, this is just, it's just ridiculous. But what it stems from is that the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest gay advocacy, LGBTQ advocacy in the nation, has laid out a list of 85 recommendations for the Biden administration. And they gave it to him, after the election, probably before the inauguration. And well before the inauguration, these rules were, I don't think they've been actually voted on yet, but they were written and presented. And, I remember back in the Clinton administration, there was this sheet. It was about 10 or 12 gay and lesbian platform demands. And, most of those things have already been enacted, like same-sex marriage, for instance. There were, so this is just 85 demands now. So it's got to be very comprehensive. This is kind of minute. They can still do floor arguments using their regular kind of language, but in the rules, you have to put this there. And I think what this does, it just kind of sets the tone.
Yes.
It was a way that Nancy Pelosi and others could just, sort of obey their directives. But they've also, in these rules, established a permanent Office of Diversity and Inclusion.
There you go.
So you're going to start seeing hiring done with regard to this. I think I mentioned in the show when I was hosting this week, there has been a sub-cabinet appointment. I think it's at HHS, who's a transgender. So, they're pushing this. They're pushing this. The acceptance that there's no difference between men and women. And it's, number one, it's offensive. And talk about violations of religious liberty, where the Bible,
there you go.
Is very clear about a man and a woman. And talk about making it difficult for our children, to understand these two things that they're taught, one at home and one now at the school, and two ways they're treated, and little kids coming in and being treated as the gender that they are not, and it's very obvious to the child. There's just so much, and the lack of being able to communicate clearly. I mean, to say sibling's child instead of niece and nephew. So that's where, we're going to have to deal with all of this. And some of it is just so ridiculous that you almost want to make fun of it, but it's also serious. And it gets into our religious liberty and our free speech and our rights. So, it's something I think, again, we Christians are going to have courage to stand up against, because if we speak against it, we're going to probably be canceled.
The lack of intellectual firepower behind these ideas is evidenced by the ending prayer when they did this, which said "Amen" and "Ah, woman."
Right.
I mean, that just says everything, right? I mean, this is the brilliance of these ideas. This is nonsense. Most Americans know it's nonsense. It's just kind of the new thing that they're trying to push. But they can try to push against God all they want. They're still male and female, and everybody recognizes that. But in the process, they can do a lot of destruction. And again, I think of these poor girls and athletes as an example of the ones that are going to suffer, as well as little children who are going to be confused about how God made them. It's sad, but it's up for some people to refuse to go along with the lies. And it's important that people say the emperor has no clothes, because as soon as you say it, everybody goes, well, I'll be darned. You're right. I should have said that myself. And so it requires a lot of courage in those to speak the truth of God.
We're on the transgender part of this. One place it goes that's really harmful to religious liberty is to medical personnel. And like in the military, there have been some restrictions on the forcing of medical personnel to perform gender change surgeries, different kinds of changes to your body. And I'm sure that's going to be reversed.
It's one of our cases right now. We've got a case where they're trying to force a doctor to, a medical personnel to do something in violation of his faith with regard to hormone therapy and sex change. And so it's already happening for sure.
And pediatricians are under pressure to, go along with this transgender agenda with children. And, you've seen children. We've even talked to a dad here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area whose wife has taken their boy and treats him as a girl, and this father has lost all rights to even speak to the child about the fact that he's truly a boy, and it's just heartbreaking and tragic. So there are a lot of human consequences. And what about the people who get these surgeries? They get these hormone treatments. You have the young girls who socially, they just get together in groups and they all decide, oh, we're going to be boys, and we are boys, and we need to have the hormones and the puberty blockers and all of that. So there's a lot of physical harm done, psychological harm done by this agenda.
Kelly, one of the things that you and I have talked about is this book, which I'll hold up one more time, Live Not by Lies. And you said we just cannot continue to live by lies. We have to live by truth. There's a chapter in here about courage. Of course, you and your wife have been teaching about that and about how the church and families and religion are the way in which we can have courage and we can set up, if you will, resistance. And of course, Rod Dreyer, who wrote this, is talking about the fact that if you just even say the wrong pronoun in some of these situations, you can be canceled. So what we're going to have to face in the future is, even if these edicts do not come down from the federal government, even in the private sector, we're going to have to show courage.
Absolutely. And again, the key is your family and local small groups. And all of these, you talk to all these people who live through totalitarian regimes, and the thing that the totalitarian regimes cannot handle is people standing for the truth. And that comes out of the church. It comes out of small groups of each other, giving each other support. And that's what you're going to need. There's a chapter on religion. Why is religion so attacked in these type of regimes that attack freedom, in all of them? Well, the reason is because in order to stand up against the lies, the pressure, the intimidation, you're not going to suffer to just resist. As he put it, religion gives you something that you live for and that you're willing to die for. And when you do that, you're dangerous to this secularist government that wants to, force you to go along with lies. And so it's going to require courage of people, and it's people of faith who are going to have the courage. And so it's a great book. If people haven't read it, it'll make sense of a lot of the things you see going on around you that look crazy, and you'll begin to understand, I need to be faithful, and I need to be willing to pay a price for being faithful, and that's what it means to be a Christian.
I sent people to First Liberty Live, kind of send them to Standing Firm in the Facebook page, because you and your wife have actually taught through this book. And even though I read the book, I learned some things by listening to you and Karen go through that as well. So those are resources, but we are simply running out of time. I apologize for some of you who didn't get a chance to get through. I only got one guest on Monday. We're kept it open, so you can maybe make some of those comments then. I want to thank Doug and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.